Hi everyone, hope you're all doing well. After all this time, I think it's fair to say that I've become very familiar with the mangas of Onimusha, having been the first person to acquire and fully cover scans of Night of Genesis 2 years ago, as well as translating most of Twilight of Desire. However, at around April of 2024, a user on the Onimusha subreddit known as TJ6 had managed to source and upscale scans of yet another Chinese Onimusha manga, this one actually being a tie-in manga for Onimusha Warlords. While it initially just seemed to be going over what we already know, it turns out that this manga actually goes into the events with a lot more detail, so much so that certain parts of Onimusha lore that we thought we knew could very well be called into question, such as the true origins of the Fisherman's Sword, or the circumstances of which Samanosuke meets Miyogoro and enters the Dark Realm. Obviously, as I've mentioned before, I am not a Chinese speaker, and while I still have ways of getting fairly accurate translations for the most part, there were still some difficulties in making sure they were accurate. Thankfully, our friend Leopricorn, as well as another user over in the Onimusha Discord that has asked to remain anonymous, were able to help out, graciously offering to help me with any difficulties I may have since they are both fluent speakers. It is no exaggeration to say that this would have absolutely not been possible without their constant help, so I'd like to thank them both for being there every step of the way. As one final cherry on top, another Reddit user known as BonsaiMan007 managed to source another set of scans that didn't have that damnable watermark on the bottom that ended up covering some of the text, making it near impossible to properly translate. The final result of all this work is 10 fully translated chapters of the Warlords manga, so let's go through it together, shall we? Many thanks once again to everyone involved in making this happen. As one would expect, the manga begins with the establishing shots over Okehazama before Nobunaga arrives. Obviously I don't need to narrate most of these events like normal since we all know the story, but we'll still show how the manga ends up depicting them. Already this shows just how different the presentation is here compared to the other mangas. Needless to say, this is my favourite in that respect, with just how detailed so many of the events and characters are here. Unlike in the game itself, we actually see Nobunaga being presented with the severed head of Yoshimoto Imagawa, as opposed to just being told that he's dead and him taking their word for it. Though Samanosuke interestingly seems to be shown almost dreading this outcome, at least before he's attacked by some stray Oda soldiers. The manga actually suggests that Samanosuke had arrived specifically to oppose Nobunaga, though had done so too late since he had already defeated Yoshimoto. We see more narration that seems to really hype up Samanosuke's skill as the fight goes on, so much so that he is considered to be the most powerful samurai alive at this point. I suppose this would make sense given how desperate Tokichiro is when trying to repeatedly recruit him, but it admittedly felt a little weird when I first started reading through it. We of course then get a shot of the stray arrow that flies towards Nobunaga, though what is interesting is that we still have no idea who even fired it, as it rips through Oda's forces and barrels its way towards Nobunaga, piercing his throat. Strangely, Samanosuke is actually rather shocked to see this, and while the narration suggests that it marks the end of everything, it soon asserts that it is instead the beginning of a whole new nightmare. The scene where Samanosuke rides on horseback to meet with Princess Yuki after receiving her letter is pretty much identical here, though the manga rather erroneously marks it as 1 year after Nobunaga's death, which we most certainly know is not true since Yoshitatsu Saito's 1561 death occurs 1 year after Warlords, so I changed it accordingly. Get used to that by the way, because there are a number of similar mistakes in this manga. Obviously, Samanosuke rushes back to the castle to save Yuki as a pair of Three Eyes infiltrate it and kidnap her, and he gets there to find her missing before Kaede arrives and offers to help search for her. This of course leads to them splitting up and Samanosuke getting ambushed by the Three Eyes, though their attacks are useless as he retaliates in order to rescue Yuki. The Three Eyes end up fleeing since they know they can't beat Samanosuke, and after he and Yuki reunite, the two are confronted by Osric in what's honestly a really cool shot. This ends up demonstrating something that this manga actually does really well as time goes on. When a notable Genma makes an appearance, the manga manages to actually make them feel threatening in some way. While Osric deflects Samanosuke's blow with his armour in-game, here he just stands there as Samanosuke keeps swinging at him, completely unaffected by his attacks before brutally retaliating with his club. The attack even ends up shattering Samanosuke's sword and instantly knocks him unconscious, leaving Osric to kidnap Yuki unopposed. This leads us to Samanosuke's encounter with the Oni clan, which is actually more extensive here. And while it does start the same way as it does in game, the Oni actually go so far as to both explain and show the identity of Fortinbras as the Genma king, while also identifying him as the warrior that they have been waiting for to finally bring him down. What is interesting is that despite the game seeming to make the Oni a little more ambiguous in their nature, the Oni outright identify the Genma as humanity's greatest enemy as opposed to just theirs. Not to mention that a pure heart, strong will, firm belief, and deep wisdom is required to use the Oni Gauntlet that they give him. It's good to see that the Oni were depicted from the very start as being rather altruistic rather than having a more enemy of my enemy outlook. Of course, Samanosuke wakes up and makes his way to the first encounter with the zombie warriors as they kill a Saito soldier. The problem is, Osric ended up breaking his sword, leaving him completely unarmed outside of the gauntlet itself. So what does he do? He straight up throws hands with the zombie warrior, thinking that the gauntlet will make him strong enough to kill it. Unfortunately, this doesn't quite go to plan as his punch ends up doing nothing. But just as they swing at him, a very familiar sword made of pure energy suddenly materializes and pierces through the Genma. We then cut to a very familiar scene of the Oda clan marching under the moonlight led by Nobunaga on horseback. Chapter 1 ends with Nobunaga outright expecting to meet Samanosuke very soon as he prepares to complete his pact with Fortinbras. Don't worry, we're not going to faff about after every chapter, so let's move straight on to the next chapter as this starts pretty interestingly. Instead of picking up from Samanosuke's battle with the zombie warriors, we actually find ourselves tens of thousands of years prior in the demon world where the original Oni Genma War first took place. Now here's where we see the first real delve into what this manga actually establishes lore-wise. For the longest time, we initially believed the Onin War to be the original war between the Oni, humanity, and the Genma, but it seems that they were actually two separate conflicts. Historically, the Onin War was a real 10-year-long conflict that occurred between 1467 and 1477, and that is likely the war where humanity began fighting alongside the Oni against the Genma. It turns out that the Oni clan resided within the demon world alongside the Genma during the creation of the Earth, and tens of thousands of years prior to Warlords waged war against the Genma in order to prevent them from invading the human world. The most powerful Oni warriors fought alongside the Oni God of Darkness against Fortinbras, the God of Darkness actually wielding the Bishaman's sword, which proved to be the only reason that they remained undefeated. Unfortunately, this still proved insufficient to overcome the full strength of Fortinbras, so the Oni were left with no choice but to sacrifice themselves in order to seal him within the demon world. With this act, they could only wait until the day comes that a warrior capable of wielding the Bishaman's sword would appear, now believing that warrior to be Samanosuke. This seal on the demon world was placed where the Inabayama castle would eventually be constructed, which is why the Genma appear here in 1560. I love the depth that this manga goes into establishing the origins of the Oni and Genma, possibly giving us a clearer picture than we've ever had before. We cut back to Samanosuke as the energy-based sword suddenly dissipates, leaving him at the mercy of the surrounding zombie warriors. As they attack, he once again decides to start throwing hands. Only this time he actually does some damage after having awakened the power of the gauntlet. The next few panels having quite literally punching them into pieces and absorbing their souls, at one point outright backhanding one so hard that it shatters its skull into pieces. We quite literally see Samanosuke get a full anime-style rage boost as he dismantles the zombie warriors. Once that's done, we see him go through the corridor to find some Saito soldiers, though the ambush scene is actually skipped here as he instantly finds them and asks what happened, them telling him and actually warning him not to go to the castle. As expected, he ignores their warnings and heads there anyway to find Yuki. We then cut to a scene where Guildenstern is actually reporting their progress to Fortinbras within his palace in the demon world. While he's happy to hear of their success, as well as the prospect of finally conquering the human world, he senses that another force is coming to defeat them. It's also the first time that the Dark Ceremony is mentioned, and while Fortinbras is confident, he orders the destruction of this new threat to ensure that their plans succeed. Samanosuke arrives at the keep at the same time, fighting through more Genma on the way before his gauntlet begins to draw him towards a familiar shrine, giving us our first glimpse of Shiden. Instead of just slotting it into the gauntlet, the orb is outright absorbed into the gauntlet itself, allowing Samanosuke to manifest the iconic Reizan in a pretty damn cool illustration after having briefly conjured an energy-based version of it. With Reizan in hand, Samanosuke immediately finds and confronts Osric in another really cool shot as he menacingly towers over him. Here, when asked where Yuki is, Osric actually tells him that she is planned to be sacrificed for the Dark Ceremony, leading to the two beginning their fight. As it turns out, Samanosuke actually still proves to not be strong enough to defeat him here, as Osric actually starts pushing him back, at least until he manages to tap into the power of his gauntlet and launch Reizan's magic attack, something that the manga simply calls Thunder Slash. While this doesn't damage Osric, it traps him in a thunder cage, giving Samanosuke the chance to actually slice off Osric's arm. This is so much more brutal than what we see in game, and to be perfectly honest, I bloody love it. The severed arm actually disintegrates into souls, which Samanosuke absorbs before stabbing Reizan into the nearby cave wall. Here's where I really start to appreciate how the manga incorporates game mechanics into the story, not only with the souls appearing mid-fight, but with the appearance of the magic mirror. It turns out that his gauntlet caused him to instinctively seek it out in order to use the souls that he has already absorbed thus far, upgrading Reizan from level 1 to level 2. Yes, Samanosuke upgrades his weapons mid-fight as a sort of trump card against an opponent that he otherwise cannot defeat. Osric does manage to break free of the Thunder Cage in the meantime, but Samanosuke manages to use this newly upgraded Reizan to slice through Osric's thick hide with a fatal blow, bringing him down once and for all and absorbing what's left of his soul. Let's be honest, the way these big fights are depicted is brilliant, isn't it? This obviously leads to Samanosuke reaching Guildenstern's laboratory to find the scientist mid-experiment. But while he notices the body on Guildenstern's table, he actually mistakes it for the corpse of Princess Yuki, believing himself to be too late to save her. In an act of pure fury, Samanosuke actually attempts to kill Guildenstern there and then, but when he takes a swing, Guildenstern instantly disappears as if it was just an illusion, only for a bright light to appear to his left as a wave of magic is shot right at him. He tries to instinctively block it with his hand since he isn't able to move his sword fast enough, but the light actually cuts into his neck like a blade, threatening to kill him there and then. At the same time, a number of Genma are shown to be overwhelmed by someone else, and we actually cut to Kaede dashing through the castle in search of clues. Suddenly, the rope on a small keepsake breaks without warning, the keepsake having been a gift from Samanosuke, and as she believes that Samanosuke may be in danger, a tentacle suddenly breaks through the ground and wraps around her. The fleshy root grips her leg and ends up dragging her below the earth into a place resembling hell itself, ending the chapter as both Samanosuke and Kaede are left to their fates. On to chapter 3, we get a brief synopsis of Nobunaga's resurrection at the hands of the Genma, though it suggests here that Fortinbras is the one who revived him as opposed to Guildenstern. We get a double page detailing the 3-level class system among Genma society, as well as the fact that every Genma was born from Fortinbras, who himself has existed since the beginning of creation itself. Fortinbras himself is said to possess an invincible demonic body as well as magic power so great that the only entity capable of contending is the Great Oni God. I think it's safe to say that this is indeed the Oni God of Darkness, which actually shows that not as much of Onimusha's lore had been altered as we thought for the story of Dawn of Dreams. We cut back to Samanosuke as he recovers from the previous blow, though finds that it had actually cut off his middle and index fingers when he attempted to block it. He suddenly finds himself surrounded by possessed bones as they rise up in incalculable numbers, and he hears the Oni speaking to him as they tell him to escape from this illusory realm before it claims his life. It turns out that Guildenstern is capable of manipulating a person's mind into falling into the strange realm, one where Guildenstern holds complete control, with Samanosuke soon realising that the body on his table is not actually Yuki. Again, I love how the manga actually demonstrates why high-class Genma are so dangerous, as Guildenstern doesn't even need to lift a finger to be a threat here. What's worse is that dying while within this realm will also result in death in the real world, and the Oni calls Samanosuke's attention to the fire on his left. Upon noticing it, the fire suddenly awakens as Guildenstern turns his attention to the warrior, and the gauntlet ends up absorbing the power of the nearby Kuen. As a result, we get another really cool illustration as Samanosuke gets his hands on Enryu and demands Yuki to be returned. Like we see in game, Guildenstern summons Reynaldo as he explains the details of Nobunaga's resurrection and Dark Pact, but when Samanosuke tries to fight, he slices through Reynaldo and causes it to be split in two, the both of them blocking him from pursuing Guildenstern as he escapes. Infuriated at the scientist's escape, he ends up using Enryu's magic, which actually forms what appears to be a living dragon made of fire that actively hunts the Reynaldo like prey. Naturally, the Reynaldo are unable to escape this attack and are consumed in Enryu's fire, leaving Samanosuke to continue his search. We see him rushing to the front of the castle as we get our first depiction of a Mozun, though Samanosuke manages to immediately dispel it. Strangely, it appears to be a level 2 Thunder Mozun, but since he did manage to level up Reizan during his battle with Osric, it does still add up. This leads straight into his first meeting with Tokachiro as he gives Yumimaru the chance to escape, beginning their interaction as Tokachiro instantly recognises him. Interestingly, Tokachiro recognises him as a member of the Saito clan even though Samanosuke has since left it, identifying himself soon after. The conversation goes mostly the same, though Samanosuke refuses after saying that the thoughts of a dead man mean nothing to him, still not believing that Nobunaga is no longer dead. This is another instance where the manga erroneously suggests that Nobunaga died a year prior, so I just reworded it a bit to make more sense. Regardless, Tokachiro leaves, promising to meet again. We cut back to Kaede as she's being dragged into the abyss, landing as the tentacle suddenly disappears, but Kaede quickly turns to find herself surrounded by zombie warriors. She does try to fight them off, but while she is capable of defending herself here, she decides to pull out a paper charm due to their overwhelming numbers. It's here that we learn that Kaede grew up in the Shaolin School of Ninjutsu, which isn't much but does give us a crumb of extra backstory for her. We get another brilliant illustration as Kaede activates her absorbing talisman to kill the Genma around her, and the talisman fires astral blades through each and every one of them. What's interesting is that this may well be referring to the in-game soul absorber, which is odd considering Kaede cannot actually use that item in-game. Still, it's cool to see the tools that she has at her disposal, as well as the fact that she is entirely capable of bringing Genma down herself. This gives her the chance to escape the abyss as she jumps back up from where she came, getting back to the castle and continuing her search. She ends up running into a fleeing Yumimaru, with Samanosuke close behind attempting to catch up to him. The scene here actually kinda condenses two in-game scenes together, with their meeting with Yuumaru remaining the same while also having Yuumaru himself explain his past leading up to Yuki adopting him as a brother. I honestly appreciate this since it actually feels a bit more satisfying for us to see how Kaede initially learned this as opposed to just learning it off screen. Still, Yuumaru flees when Samanosuke offers that they stick together, but Samanosuke actually stops Kaede from chasing him specifically because he doesn't trust them yet, at which point they are immediately caught by the castle's traps. Yep, we're beginning the trap section now as they try to pull the levers to make it through, with Samanosuke actually pulling the wrong one and almost taking an arrow to the head. While he avoids it, it does crack open his armour before they manage to open the steel gates. We even get to see him find the chest containing the holy armour, with Samanosuke beginning to wear it from here on out while they figure out the wooden panel puzzle, though it's actually identified as a shogi board here. They solve it fairly quickly before they reach everyone's favourite room, Samanosuke pushing Kaede outside while he gets trapped. Yep, we are at the infamous water trap as the room begins flooding, leading to Kaede finding the sliding puzzle and attempting to solve it. Here, we actually see Samanosuke attempting to break out, because why would he just stand there and wait? The problem is that even Enryu's magic fails to break through the door, and he actually gets submerged completely here as he tries to figure something out. While Kaede struggles almost as much as we all did back in the day, the water actually begins to drain as bubbles begin to rise around Samanosuke, his head soon popping out of the water. We then cut to Princess Yuki, who's trying to flee the castle dungeons only to bump into something. That something turning out to be Samanosuke. Yeah, we know who this is. We actually get an earlier introduction of Stellardo, who manages to find Yuki and trick her, flashing a menacing smirk as she embraces him. We then cut again to the top of the castle as another familiar face awaits Samanosuke, asserting that he will have to kill him first before saving the princess, and we end chapter 3 with a shot of Marcellus as he stands patiently waiting for Samanosuke to challenge him. Chapter 4 cuts us back to Stellardo and Yuki, the latter suddenly noticing that something is off about Samanosuke and realising that he is a doppelganger. Stellardo actually gets a bit creepy here as he approaches her and calls her cute. Though thankfully this is stopped rather quickly as Guildenstern appears and tells him to stop. He reminds Stellardo that his task is to deal with Samanosuke, not Yuki, and warns that if he doesn't want to be killed by Fortinbras, then to return to his post in the prison, Stellardo obeying as he prepares to return. Back at the water trap, we learn that Samanosuke has actually begun to use Enryu's fire magic to evaporate the water as fast as it flows, giving both him and Kaede more time for the trap to be disarmed. It takes a while, but she manages to solve the puzzle, but as she watches the water drain out of the room, she is suddenly faced with Enryu as it comes crashing down on top of her, a desperate Samanosuke making one final attempt to break down the door just as it opens. Luckily, the sword stops just inches from her head, though he notes that he was moving too fast to be able to stop it on his own, asserting that the sword itself stopped the attack before it could hit Kaede. This is another interesting tidbit of lore here, suggesting that the gauntlet as well as the Oni weapons themselves hold some level of sentience, at least enough to act on their own to stop attacks on those who are not their enemies. After disarming the rest of the traps, they split up before Samanosuke uses the Saito crest to open the door on the 4th floor, discovering the Three Eyes as it kidnaps Yuumaru. Tokichiro appears again and allows it to flee as he asks Samanosuke about joining the Oda clan, only for him to demand that he move, and Tokichiro continues to attempt to convince him much like in-game, explaining the dark ceremony that will result in Yuki's sacrifice. Samanosuke tries to attack, but Tokichiro successfully flees, leaving him to discover the wind Mozan that keeps Yuumaru trapped. He does try to break it with Enryu, but its magic doesn't leave a scratch, so he decides to climb up to the roof instead, though senses a powerful foe waiting for him. He discovers Marcellus on the roof, having anticipated Samanosuke's arrival and hoping for him to be a worthy opponent. The two begin their battle, though Marcellus's shield proves enough to defend against Samanosuke's attacks. Once Samanosuke gets tired and slows down, Marcellus mocks his weakness and retaliates as he uses his wind magic, forcing Samanosuke to back off as the roof tiles fly into him like knives. He ends up getting pulled back in by the vortex, and as he tries to cut down the incoming tiles, he puts all of his faith into the gauntlet as he tapped into it, managing to upgrade Enryu into its level 2 variant and launching a powerful attack. Again, I love how this manga handles the concept of upgrading weapons, and doing so mid-fight feels a lot more thematic than just stopping at one of the many magic mirrors. The newly upgraded magic attack forces Marcellus to block, but the attack actually manages to damage his shield, causing it to completely shatter. Marcellus is rather pleased at this display of strength, but still labels it too weak to defeat the Genma as he slashes at Samanosuke, though the attack thankfully fails to penetrate Samanosuke's new holy armor. Still, the force of the attack sends him back towards the fish statue as Marcellus chases, but Samanosuke pushes himself off of the statue towards the Genma, managing to drive Enryu into Marcellus's chest. However, Marcellus is still not defeated as he grabs the blade of Enryu with his now free hand and stabs at Samanosuke once again, this time breaking through the armor and drawing blood. This is enough to send Samanosuke flying as he falls from the roof of the castle towards the ground, but Samanosuke manages to produce Reizan and throw it towards Marcellus. With Marcellus's soul having leaked out from his chest wound, Samanosuke absorbs it as he falls to further increase his strength, and he manages to reform Enryu, stabbing it into the ground as he falls there. Again, we're left with another lore tidbit as it establishes that the gauntlet is normally only capable of producing one Oni weapon at a time, with Samanosuke actively transforming one into the other instead of replacing the orbs, rather similar to how it works in the opening cutscene to Onimusha 3. Marcellus sees the incoming Reizan and manages to break it with his own attack, but it turns out that Samanosuke had once again produced the energy of Reizan much like his first encounter with the zombie warriors, and he is suddenly shot back up to the roof in a pillar of fire after having managed to upgrade Enryu again thanks to Marcellus's soul, now wielding the level 3 variant. I know I'm going on about these different full page shots, but I just can't get over how good these look. We get another instance of really cool imagery as we see the magic attack striking Marcellus, seeing his point of view as he notices his own set of legs from a strange angle. This only lasts a moment, however, as Marcellus finally succumbs to his wound, Samanosuke having outright sliced him in half and dropped the upper body from the castle. We then get a shot of Samanosuke absorbing Marcellus's soul, and the manga actually explains how the different coloured souls work, with red increasing his power, yellow healing him, and blue fueling his magic attacks. Yes, the manga explains the game mechanics. As expected, he notices Arashi nearby and obtains it to get his hands on Shippu, using it to get past the Mozun. The scene of him saving Yumemaru and speaking with him alongside Kaede is rather similar in tone, though it's surprisingly Yumemaru who tells of Yuki's lack of freedom and choice to save him after learning that he had no parents. He then denounces war as a concept, blaming it for the death of his family as well as for Yuki's loneliness, something that honestly gives Yumemaru some much needed depth. He's just kind of annoying in game, but here it honestly feels like you kind of want to root for him. It also kind of makes sense for his progression into Kaijiro Maeda, having always been someone to not care for war, instead of needing Samanosuke to tell him why war is bad. Here, Samanosuke just goes right into his recollection of his foreign journeys at the behest of Mitsuhide, inspiring Yumemaru to share the fact that despite differences in skin colour or language, we're all still human in the end. This leads to the same interruption by Nui, who tells of Yuki's location, though the manga interestingly names her Takoko, something that Leoprechaun actually confirmed, so it wasn't just bad translation on my end. Still, we both agreed to keep it as Nui. Samanosuke leaves Kaede to watch over the two as he goes underground and instantly finds the door blocked by restless souls, though it just skips to him instantly using the Purify Bell to get inside. He enters to find glass containers with long-armed demons stored inside, and the chapter ends as they all begin to break out and prepare to attack him. Chapter 5 picks right up from there as the long-armed demons emerge and begin attacking Samanosuke, but he just keeps cutting through them now that he has gotten used to the power of his Oni Gauntlet. Having now also gotten used to Shippu, he uses its magic attack to kill the rest of them, and after absorbing all of their souls, he gains enough power to upgrade it to its level 2 form. We then go straight to the room with the Genma monument where Tokichiro pops up again, and this scene goes just like in game, as Samanosuke is incapacitated while Tokichiro warns that Kaede will soon die with him. This obviously leads to Stellato finding her and knocking her out while Nui suddenly grabs and kidnaps Yumemaru, and Samanosuke is left to be sucked into the ground as Tokichiro leaves. This leads to the first playable section for Kaede, and I'll be honest, this is one of my favourite parts of the manga. Not because of any lore implications, but because it makes Kaede look like a genuine badass. After dealing with some zombie archers, Kaede is actually attacked by a Baguwasha, an attack that she is unable to hold back. As she's forced to dodge, she's intercepted by a second Baguwasha, which is honestly any Warlords player's worst nightmare right here. Kaede is forced to think on her feet since she knows she can't beat them head on, so she flips behind the first one and boots the back of its head, forcing it to continue its attack and kill the other Baguwasha, leaving Kaede to immediately grab its head and slice its throat, which beheads it entirely. Seriously, this is by far the most respect Kaede has ever had in the entire series. We then skip immediately to the Western prison, where she finds the puzzle box containing the sacred knife, but she ends up doing what we all did and gets the puzzle wrong. This ends up triggering a trap as Genma drop from the ceiling, though they prove no match for her, and Kaede manages to work out the puzzle and open the box. The manga insists that the sacred knife is basically on par with Samanosuke's weapons, minus the Bishaman sword of course, as it was yet another weapon crafted by the Oni to defeat the Genma. This leads us to Kaede's attempts to free Yuki from her prison cell, even including the sparks scraping her face, which as we know ends with Guildenstern appearing and taking Yuki before Kaede is able to free her. Kaede does try to break through the bars in order to try and save her, but she suddenly stops as she feels another presence nearby, barely reacting in time as the Vulture Man appears to attack her before disappearing again to throw her off. She takes a moment to use a herb to heal a wound, only for the Vulture Man to appear again and attack before once again vanishing, Kaede working out that it can become invisible. She then manages to notice a very faint image much like we can in-game, allowing her to dodge another hit and throw a kunai at it. When the first one misses, she throws a massive volley, though they end up failing to hit it as well as Kaede actually runs out, forcing her to actually throw her sacred knife as well. The manga suggests this to be a miscalculation as the Vulture Man appears behind her, but she actually sees it coming as she suddenly turns around, dodges the attack, and locks its arms in place so it can't escape. She had intentionally thrown her kunai in order to use their reflective metal as a mirror to see the Vulture Man appear behind her, while the sacred knife bounces between the walls and towards its back. This is what I love about how Kaede is portraying here. Not only is her raw skill on par with Samanosuke, but when faced with opponents that she cannot overpower, she ends up outsmarting them extremely quickly, using what resources she has in very clever ways. I really wish we saw more of that throughout the series. Following this, we have Samanosuke waking up in the cave and trying to find a way out, only to be stopped by an ominous feeling as Stellato slowly approaches from the darkness. Strangely, this manga doesn't outright name Stellato, instead just calling him Fake Samanosuke, though I suppose his name is one that's never actually mentioned in any of the games either. What I love about Stellato here is that he's actually a bit of a snarky asshole, responding to Samanosuke's question about if he's supposed to be scared of him by saying, "Well, I don't want you falling in love with me, do I?" The sarcasm is so out of place, but I absolutely love it. The two begin their fight, but as Samanosuke manages to wound Stellato, the Genma just cocks a smirk in response, and we end the chapter by learning that damage sustained by Stellato is also dealt to Samanosuke, though not the other way around. Chapter 6 immediately picks up from there, with it reminding us of Stellado's ability to cause Samanosuke to suffer the same damage that he does, while also revealing the nature of Stellado's creation, having been created by Fortinbras using previously spilled drops of Samanosuke's blood that the Genma had secretly collected. Again, I love how we actually learn more about some of the characters than we ever understood before, with this information meaning that Stellado is actually rather similar to Genma puppet Kaede from Twilight of Desire, with him being created specifically in Samanosuke's image rather than simply choosing his identity as a disguise. In spite of the risks, Samanosuke continues to fight at full strength, though Stellado also proves to not only match his skill, but also predict his moves, and it seems that whether he wins or not, Samanosuke is destined to die either way. Stellado begins to mock him by mentioning how much Yuki praised him, threatening to replace him completely and even suggesting that he would save her himself and that she may even pledge herself to him. In the end, he bears down on him and reminds him that he will die either way, meaning that Yuki will be sacrificed for the Dark Ceremony without him to save her. But when he tells Samanosuke to just allow Stellado to kill him, Samanosuke snaps and uses Shippu's magic to trap him in a tornado despite the latter's warnings that he will die as well. However, Samanosuke declares that if he is to die, then he will die following his own path, pulling out Reizan as more wounds appear on his body from the damage dealt to Stellado from Shippu's magic. His final attack proves far too much for Stellado to defend against, and Samanosuke bolts forward and impales Stellado against the wall, accepting that even if he dies, Stellado will die with him. Stellado finally dies as his body dissolves into souls from the blow, but in dealing a fatal blow, the same wound appears on his own body as well, causing Samanosuke to collapse into the water of the cave, having now shared his imposter's fate. It's here that we see yet another game mechanic actually being depicted in a pretty cool scene where his body begins to emit a yellow glow, the glow eventually erupting from his body as his wounds begin healing themselves before Samanosuke actually gets back up. It turns out that Samanosuke had been saved by a talisman, much like in game. As he gets up, he absorbs Stellado's soul, which upgrades Reizan to its level 3 form, and we learn that the voices of the Oni clan had spoken to him mid-fight, assuring him that he can defeat Stellado despite sharing his wounds. When Samanosuke found the holy armor, he had also found a talisman, with the Oni revealing it to be another of their creations designed to rekindle life. Again, a nice little lore tidbit there that we never had, but I really do appreciate the fact that this shows the Oni as having always been rather altruistic, with them constantly trying to support Samanosuke as well as having created artifacts designed specifically to save lives. Following this, Samanosuke finds the evil plate and climbs out of the well, using it to open the evil door and find Nui with an unconscious Yumemaru. We then see a very shortened version of her transformation scene, though funny enough, the only part that's really shown is also the only part that was censored in the Western release, as she transforms into Hekuba. Another strange thing is that the manga never actually calls her Hekuba at any point, including during their final confrontation in the Eastern Warehouse, instead only ever referring to her as Takoko, so I decided to add her true name myself here. Like in game, she flaps her massive wings to push Samanosuke back and causes the appearance of the Demon Gate, destroying the western half of the castle in the process as the gate rises up from the earth. Hekuba escapes through the gate like normal, and Samanosuke is prevented from chasing her by a small Genma object that begins shielding the door, though the Oni speak to him again and outright tell him to find the Great Oni Bow and Great Oni Arrow to break through, calling it the Gate to Hell. As they direct him to the east, Kaede arrives to witness the gate, only for them to immediately split up in order to find a way through. However, Samanosuke feels himself being subconsciously pulled to a hidden room on the first floor, where he is suddenly met by Minogoro, who actually identifies him by name here. On top of this, he outright identifies himself as a member of the Oni clan, making him the first Oni that Samanosuke ever meets in person, and Minogoro warns him that he is not strong enough to defeat Fortinbras and says that he must get his hands on the Bishaman's sword in order to succeed. This makes a change from Minogoro being a bit more vague about the situation, instead outright appearing specifically to ensure that Samanosuke gets his hands on the Bishaman's sword, which does make more sense since he was later hunted down specifically for this act by the Genma. He tells Samanosuke of the Dark Realm and warns him that he may not come back alive since nobody truly knows how many Genma reside inside, but Samanosuke is rather eager to enter regardless, leading to Minogoro sending him inside as he finds himself surrounded by numerous different Genma. As this happens, we see Guildenstern within the demon world as he senses that Samanosuke had found the Dark Realm while he is speaking with the upper body of another Genma. He finally begins to recognise Samanosuke's skill, though still believes him too weak since he's only human, as he notes that each different Genma within the Dark Realm is the strongest of its kind. He actually calls the Genma within the Dark Realm the Secret Army of Fortinbras, specifically for when he finally manages to reach the human world, which does raise questions as to what the Dark Realm used to be before it was identified as an Oni training ground in Onimusha 3. He is, however, warned by the other Genma not to underestimate Samanosuke's skill, saying that he is so powerful that he has found unity between man and blade, calling his swordsmanship divine and outright suggesting that the Dark Realm will not stop him. While only low-class Genma exist on the first 5 floors, it is still their territory, meaning that over 100 exist there alone, though Samanosuke still proves far too much for them. Fun fact, there are a total of 150 Genma in the game's version of the Dark Realm across all 20 floors, so this really emphasises just how dangerous the Dark Realm is if over 100 exist on the first 5 floors alone. The other Genma says that a low-level Genma will never be anything more, and while Guildenstern acknowledges this, he questions if Samanosuke will still have the strength to keep fighting after already fighting through over 100 Genma, mentioning that mid-level Genma fill the next 5 floors, but Samanosuke continues to cut his way through them. Guildenstern thinks that the only way for Samanosuke to survive is to flee instead of going deeper, but as we know, Samanosuke never flees, even if he faces certain death against the high-level Genma that appear on the lower floors. Interestingly, it actually shows Osric here, suggesting that Osric himself may not actually be the only member of his specific species. In the end, he uses Shipu's wind magic in order to devastate them and slice them to pieces, and Samanosuke stands triumphant as he manages to conquer the Dark Realm entirely. However, after fighting through so many Genma, his holy armour is left heavily damaged, and it soon shatters to pieces, unable to hold itself together any longer. Regardless, Samanosuke successfully finds and obtains the Bishaman Ocarina, something that Guildenstern senses, but as this is happening, he manages to complete his work in healing Marcellus, giving him a new set of legs and overhauling him into his power form. As Marcellus expresses excitement at facing Samanosuke once again, we end the chapter foreshadowing their final battle later in the story. Chapter 7 starts with a flashback of when Samanosuke was first handed his prized sword, making a vow to hold to the belief that he will succeed so long as he strives to do what he feels is right, as well as acknowledging that even the strongest of illusions cannot resist the light of truth. Darkness and deception are destined to fade under the light of truth, and he connects this to the Genma in the present, saying that peace can never truly exist as long as they do. But Fortinbras, who somehow manages to hear these thoughts, is left incensed. In his mind, peace is impossible so long as humans exist, asking if animals have peace when humans constantly hunt them for food. And the Genma King compares this act to themselves hunting and eating humans, calling it nothing more than a cycle of life. Both humans and Genma do the same thing, so why are humans the light and the Genma the darkness? The answer is that humans believe themselves to be the masters of the earth, but once the dark ceremony is complete, Fortinbras will break the seal and become the new master of earth, decreeing that he and the Genma will become the light of truth. We cut back to present Samanosuke bursting out of the castle keep while still no longer wearing any armour, and he is soon attacked by a trio of 3 rolling Bazoo. Interestingly, this manga actually labels them as middle-class Genma rather than low-class, something that is further supported by the fact that they are actually capable of speaking here. Samanosuke pushes back and attempts to continue forward, but the Bazoo keep chasing, having no plan to let him escape. But as he attempts to fight back, he realizes that their flesh is much harder to cut through than he had anticipated. It's here that his lack of armor dawns on him, recognizing that a single attack could very well be fatal to him without protection. And since he hasn't got enough magic power in reserve to use his magic attack, he decides he needs to kill one of them in order to restore it. He manages to single one out and land a powerful blow, but another tries to defend its brother, only to block it from behind and continue towards his first target. He lands another hit, this time breaking through its skin and decapitating it to draw out its soul, but when he tries to absorb it, it is suddenly pulled in another direction, Samanosuke turning to see that a Gyaran had absorbed it. The remaining Bazoo try to capitalize on what they think is Samanosuke's weakness, but he jumps over their attacks and uses their heads to boost himself upwards. He equips Enryu as he approaches the airborne Gyaran and attacks, and given that it's already at its level 3 form, the Gyaran dies in a single hit, allowing Samanosuke to absorb the souls and restore his magic. Acting quickly, he uses Enryu's magic to perform the Dragon Eater skill, and the fire dragon that forms from Enryu's flames engulfs the remaining Bazoo. But as this happens, Samanosuke decides that he needs more armor due to how vulnerable he has become without it. He is suddenly spoken to by the Oni clan who agree, warning that Fortinbras and even Marcellus would kill him in a single blow without any armor, also informing him that Marcellus is alive and now even more powerful than before. They tell him that he needs a special set of unbreakable armor created by the flesh and blood of the Oni clan that can significantly elevate the wearer's combat abilities. This armor is known as the armor of the Oni god, and they direct him further east in order to find it. Obviously they are referring to the Great Armor, but honestly, I feel like Armor of the Oni god just sounds so much cooler. As he reaches the waterfall, they warn him that the armor has no fixed shape, instead changing form based on whoever is wearing it, though also mentions that if the wearer has even the slightest hint of evil in their heart, the armor will painfully drain their strength and eventually turn them into an evil monster. Samanosuke finds the chest with the armor inside, but when he picks the lock, the only thing that appears is a large puff of white smoke that engulfs him completely, though also begins to restore his strength, proving that no evil exists in Samanosuke's heart. As the smoke clears, Samanosuke finds himself wearing a new set of armor in the form of the Panda costume? Yes, this manga actually canonizes the Panda costume as a form of the Great Armor. Wanna know why it takes this form? Because Samanosuke likes pandas. I'm not even kidding. He says he likes pandas, but had never imagined actually being one. As he processes this new and embarrassing costume, he is attacked by a couple of dark spiders, and they begin to annoy him. In frustration, he instinctively uses Enryu's magic, except this time, the magic is significantly stronger than before, as the armor has suddenly skyrocketed Enryu's strength so much that Samanosuke himself is left almost scared of his own power. As this happens, Kaede arrives and is left rather confused at Samanosuke's new outfit, while also questioning how the Oni Gauntlet could have transformed into a flower. Samanosuke isn't keen on fighting the Genma dressed like this, but after shouting to snap him out of his uncertainty, she encourages that they continue forward together, to which Samanosuke agrees. Despite all of this, Kaede is shown to have complete trust and faith in him as she flashes back to when they first met, something that we've only ever heard about in a small passage in the original manual for Warlords. We witness her defeat at the hands of Samanosuke years prior when she was sent by the Iga ninja clan to assassinate him, but despite her attempt at his life, he refuses to kill her in retaliation as he held no grudge against her. This only confuses Kaede, but Samanosuke tells her that everyone makes mistakes like this, but so long as they recognize that what they did was wrong, redemption is always possible. In the end, the greatest mistake that one can make is believing that they will never make a mistake. This causes Kaede to realize that she held no grudge either, and begins to question why she would kill someone just because she was told to. Samanosuke continues that life holds many challenges and compares a person's growth to that of a fruit, requiring both the light of day as well as the darkness of night in order to grow. While one's skills grow through hard work, their personality can only be shaped by the complexity of life, requiring both happiness and hardships in order to truly mature. This was enough to cause Kaede to renounce the Iga clan and officially separate from them, deciding to accompany Samanosuke from here on out. Short as this section is, I'm so glad that we have some sort of visual of their first meeting, as well as how Samanosuke managed to convince her to stop killing. As we cut back to the present, Samanosuke and Kaede split up in order to search for the Great Oni bow and arrow, and Samanosuke soon uses the small boat to reach the storehouse, though the manga seems to call it a temple. Much like in game, Samanosuke finds the great bow, but also gets trapped by the metal gate as it closes behind him, leaving him to be slowly surrounded by the sharks as they emerge from the water, though the manga seems to call them magic ants. Again, like in game, the sharks do not attack, instead waiting for the orders of Hakuba as she crashes her way into the building to confront him. As to be expected, Hakuba can't help but laugh at his costume as Samanosuke demands to know where she took Yumimaru, but she kinda starts to troll him a little as she isn't even sure she wants to kill him now since he looks a bit too cute. Samanosuke gets angry and repeats the question, and Hakuba tells him that Yumimaru will be killed in front of Yuki before she herself is tortured to death in order to pique her sadness and grant Nobunaga more power when he drinks her blood, mockingly suggesting that adding a panda head will make it even more powerful. Samanosuke's rage skyrockets so much that as he summons Shippu, he effectively wills it into its level 3 variant, and the chapter ends with Samanosuke vowing to kill Hakuba in retaliation. Chapter 8 starts with Samanosuke preparing to attack, though the sharks end up making the first move and attempt to swarm him, but now fueled by fury, Samanosuke's attacks prove too fast to even track, summoning a powerful storm and slashing through the sharks like melons. However, Hakuba sees an opportunity and attacks with her bladed arms, striking Samanosuke and drawing blood, though the panda costume proves durable enough to save his life from what would have been a lethal strike as Hakuba continues to taunt him, saying that it's a shame to see blood on such a handsome face. Samanosuke tries to strike back, but Hakuba flies out of range to avoid him, forcing Samanosuke to throw Shippu at her like a spear and forcing her to block it. However, Shippu ends up weakening once it leaves Samanosuke's grasp, allowing her to successfully survive the attack, but he then leaps up and grabs it in order to follow through with its full power. Hakuba is left with no choice but to avoid the attack instead of block it, but she suddenly begins twisting her body like a drill and drives her poison needle into Samanosuke's stomach, pinning him against the wall. However, she is shocked to find that her attack failed to break through the panda costume, and she exerts all of her strength to force the attack through, eventually managing to break through his armor with one last push. This causes the panda costume to disintegrate, revealing the true armor of the Oni god underneath as it raises Samanosuke to the peak of his abilities. Again, I absolutely love this art. Changing from Shippu to Enryu, Samanosuke prepares to attack as Hakuba actually begins to beg for her life, realizing that she is unable to defend herself against him. But Samanosuke uses the Dragon Eater skill at point blank range and launches her into the bottom of the lake. At the same time, the building begins to explode as Kaede arrives, telling him that she had planted explosives and encouraging him to escape. As this happens, Hakuba emerges from the water with the intent on making sure he dies with her, but like in game, her chase is cut short as a piece of burning debris falls on top of her and pins her to the ground, leaving her to burn to death. As Samanosuke and Kaede escape from the building as it explodes, they wash up nearby and he asks if she planted those explosives. Kaede says that she began to worry after seeing him fighting the Genma and planted the explosives to help defeat them. But as she produces the Great Oni arrow to give it to him, she suddenly coughs up blood and falls unconscious. Samanosuke brings her back to the castle bedchamber in order to let her rest, and sets off to use the bow and arrow to break down the barrier blocking the gate to hell. Once again, we get another piece of really good art as he prepares to fire the Great Oni bow and arrow. I just can't get over how good the art in this manga is. As expected, the Great Oni Arrow pierces the stone and destroys it, breaking the barrier and allowing the gate to open as Samanosuke steps inside. He is confronted by Guildenstern and declares that this is the day that the Genma are eradicated forever, and the incensed scientist angrily summons the overhauled Marcellus. In his power form, he drops down and locks eyes with Samanosuke as the two address one another, and as Guildenstern teleports away, Marcellus notes that with the acquisition of his new armour, Samanosuke's skills have once again improved. Summoning Enryu, Samanosuke jabs that he can't say the same for Marcellus, noting that his improvement is not as great, but the two of them are actually rather content regardless as they are now on equal grounds, Samanosuke recognising that unlike other Genma, Marcellus prefers to fight fairly, and they declare that this is where they finally decide who is stronger, leading to yet another brilliant shot of the beginning of their final battle. Despite the strength of Enryu, Marcellus proves able to resist it, and he asks Samanosuke to demonstrate his skill with Shippu as well. Samanosuke agrees and switches his weapon, beginning to attack significantly faster as Marcellus complements his skills, but Samanosuke notes that he is more than strong enough to defend against these attacks and asks Marcellus to demonstrate the extent of his own abilities. Heeding this demand, Marcellus launches a powerful attack against the storm that Shippu had created, breaking through it and slamming against Shippu with such force that the Oni Naginata actually ends up breaking from the impact, shattering into pieces as Samanosuke takes a blow to his shoulder. However, despite Samanosuke telling him to, Marcellus does not chase, declaring that he does not take advantage of his opponent despite having gained the upper hand. It is here that he switches from his power form to his speed form, as he transforms his shield and his Oni Killer Sword to his twin extinction blades, but Marcellus ends up going a step further and actually stabs his own shoulder, fully intent on keeping himself as equal to his opponent as possible. With this, the two now share the same injury, ensuring that the fight was as fair as possible, and he calls for their fight to continue, calling Samanosuke the greatest opponent that he had ever faced. It's here that, according to the narration, the two had built such a respect and admiration for each other that they had unknowingly developed a genuine friendship, with the only difference between them being which side they fought on. As Samanosuke switches from his broken Shippu into Reizan, the two rush at each other once again, and the chapter ends as their battle continues. At least it would if we didn't get the equivalent of a post-credits scene, as Yuki and Yumemaru are seen being dragged through the demon world by a horde of zombie warriors towards Guildenstern. Her pleas for freedom fall on deaf ears as Guildenstern says that he will let them go once she has become a part of the Dark Ceremony. But as she declares that Samanosuke will come to save them, he tells her that Samanosuke is already dying as he lays his hand on her head, causing her to have a vision of the battle between Samanosuke and Marcellus. Guildenstern assures that Samanosuke will be cut down by Marcellus as she is restrained against the fleshy wall, and she begins to cry in fear, which only causes Guildenstern to encourage her to do so in order to strengthen her blood for Nobunaga. The chapter truly ends here as the booming voice of Fortinbras echoes throughout the demon world, announcing the beginning of the Dark Ceremony. Chapter 9 begins with a shot of the Bishaman's sword, quickly cutting back to the battle between Samanosuke and Marcellus as the former begins to feel that his own defeat may well be at hand, especially once Marcellus lands a powerful blow to his stomach. While it doesn't crack his armour, it does still break his skin, and the force of the attack almost sends him flying off the platform, though Samanosuke does manage to grab one of the protrusions to save himself. Marcellus rushes in to capitalise, but Samanosuke manages to use Reizan to deflect the attack and jump out of the way, pleasing the convert, and he follows up by outright kneeing Marcellus in the back of the head. Following the momentum, Samanosuke uses Reizan's magic attack to strike Marcellus while he has the chance, striking him repeatedly in an attempt to kill him. However, Marcellus grips his sword and fights back, declaring himself the strongest of all the Genma and refusing to be defeated as he pushes Samanosuke back once again. Marcellus then retaliates by striking downwards with both blades, piercing into his shoulders between the armour and knocking him down. He then takes the opportunity to offer him the chance to join the Genma instead of sacrificing his life, promising that they can still be friends in the future if he does. This only hardens Samanosuke's resolve, however, and he rushes in with Reizan as Marcellus attempts to decapitate him in response, promising to take his life if he is so willing to sacrifice it. As Samanosuke thrusts Reizan towards Marcellus's chest, the Genma's blades stop just inches away from Samanosuke's neck as he had managed to strike first, piercing Reizan directly through Marcellus's torso, landing the final fatal blow to end the fight. To his surprise, Marcellus actually thanks him for a battle well fought as he drops to his knees and finally begins to explode much like he does in game, leaving behind only his soul. As he does though, Marcellus's disembodied voice actually begins to speak to Samanosuke, calling it an honour to have been able to face him while also lamenting the fact that they are on opposing sides. However, he assures that he hasn't grown fond of the warrior, asserting that if Samanosuke had accepted the offer to join the Genma, Marcellus would have instantly beheaded him in response. He expresses admiration for Samanosuke's valuing of friendship and loyalty, wishing that he had a friend that felt the same, and unable to blame him for trying to stop the dark ceremony. He encourages Samanosuke to go on ahead and save Yuki and Jimaru, wishing that he will one day become one with Samanosuke and saying his goodbyes, finally calling him a friend as Samanosuke actually sheds a tear at his death. I'm sure I needn't say this, but Marcellus dies like a damned king in this manga. He honestly feels like a mix of Garganta and Guggendontis, and I am all for it, especially when the alternative is just the mindless slave of Guildenstern that we see in game. Samanosuke steels himself and moves forward, reaching the Genma Spring and finding the sealed door, playing the Bishaman Ocarina to open it once he senses the presence of the Bishaman sword. Once he heads inside, he finds the sword impaled within a skeletal corpse much like in game, and reaches up to grab it only to be hit with a strange sensation. Grabbing the blade actually causes him to have a vivid flashback of the Oni Genma War, first witnessing the Oni God of Darkness sever the legs from Fortinbras's body. As he watches the final moments of the war, he sees that Fortinbras was still too powerful to outright kill, so the Oni God alongside the rest of the Oni clan were left with only one option: to sacrifice themselves in order to permanently seal Fortinbras within the demon world using the Bishaman sword itself. This is easily my favourite lore drop in the manga, finally explaining what the original purpose of the Bishaman sword was, as well as explaining why it was locked away in the demon world to begin with. Turns out it was used to prevent Fortinbras from leaving the demon world. This seal was placed underneath the site where the Inabayama castle would eventually be built, and the Oni speak to Samanosuke as the vision ends, warning him that taking the Bishaman sword means committing to the death of Fortinbras. Of course, despite realising the horror of Fortinbras, Samanosuke is undeterred and takes the Bishaman sword, vowing to use it to destroy the Genma King, and the blade immediately heals his wounds as soon as he takes it, while also enhancing his strength. He soon makes his way towards the ceremonial chamber and enters, warning Fortinbras that his time has come. He immediately finds Yuki and Jimaru trapped above him as soon as he enters the chamber, and while he promises to save them, a booming voice questions if he can, as the serpentine form of Fortinbras slithers out from his personal hideaway, emerging in front of Samanosuke and the prisoners. This is one final instance of someone never actually being named, with Fortinbras only ever being called the Genma King, so that was another change I decided to make. At the same time, we get the moonlit scene of Nobunaga slowly making his way down towards the demon world in order to join in the dark ceremony, with the manga interestingly referring to him as an eternal devil. We cut back to the demon world as Samanosuke demands that Fortinbras release the prisoners, brandishing the Bishaman sword as Fortinbras recognises it as the blade that cut off his legs. But as Yuki tries to tell Samanosuke to flee, Fortinbras shocks her with his magic in response, causing Samanosuke to lunge at the Genma King. Fortinbras spawns his purple lightning above the warrior in response, but Samanosuke manages to deflect it with the Bishaman sword, though it is knocked out of his hand as a result. As Fortinbras warns that defying him means courting death, Samanosuke regains the blade and asks why he should fear it, vowing to take every Genma down with him if he dies. Samanosuke lunges at Fortinbras once more as he changes to Reizan, and the chapter ends as their battle begins, with Fortinbras about to take a blow to his throat. The 10th and final chapter begins with the blow landing, Fortinbras not actually taking Samanosuke seriously until the Bishaman's sword makes contact as Samanosuke twists it in an attempt to kill him in one move. He slashes his claws to force Samanosuke away, enraged that Samanosuke was actually looking down on him, and they quickly rush back in towards one another. Fortinbras uses his lightning to no avail, but Samanosuke finds himself unable to penetrate the Genma's flesh, even with the Bishaman's sword, leading him to try and find a weakness. Before he can though, Fortinbras opens his mouth and blasts a massive stream of fire right into Samanosuke, smashing him into a pillar. He only survives thanks to the armour of the Oni god, though still suffers an injury from the impact, and Fortinbras tries to rush in and capitalise. However, Samanosuke ends up managing to use Shipu's wind magic with the Bishaman's sword, opening up a gap in Fortinbras' defences and stabbing into his throat once again. The Genma king thrashes about and twists his body until Samanosuke is eventually thrown off and is flung towards the trapped Yuki. And we end up getting a scene where Samanosuke and Yuki spend a rather uncomfortable amount of time staring into each other's eyes. Seriously, not only is he supposed to be in a relationship with Kaede already, but these two are supposed to be cousins. Thankfully, this is cut short as Yuki screams, and Samanosuke snaps out of it upon seeing a reflection of Fortinbras in her eyes, turning to see him preparing to fire another stream of flames. Knowing that he can't just dodge since Yuki will end up taking the hit if he does, he stands firm and drives the Bishaman's sword into the ground, only for it to suddenly burst with power and counter Fortinbras' flames. It turns out that Samanosuke had still yet to unlock its full potential, and upon realising this, he lunges forward towards Fortinbras, his fighting spirit elevating it to its highest level and cutting through the flames. At this point, the blade is stronger than it had ever been before, and it once again pierces Fortinbras' throat, this time actually driving through his flesh and cracking his body around it, as well as breaking the protective aura around his body. As he drops back to the ground, Samanosuke leaps back up again for one final blow, striking Fortinbras' throat one last time and actually cutting straight through it, and Fortinbras drops to the ground as this last attack had finally managed to put him down. Kaede arrives as this happens, and the ceremonial chamber begins to crumble from the intense battle, so the two free Yuki and Yumemaru and begin to flee. Unfortunately, Fortinbras gets back up and attacks, forcing Samanosuke to stay and hold him off, but he is soon gripped by the Genma king and is forced to order the others to go on without him. The three of them escape while Fortinbras squeezes the life out of Samanosuke, threatening to crush him to death then and there, but like in game, the blood from his mouth drips onto his gauntlet and causes him to transform, shredding Fortinbras' hand in the process and transforming him into a true Onimusha. Fortinbras actually recognises this form as the same being that had previously sealed him away, and furiously lunges with his other arm, but the Onimusha effortlessly slashes it to pieces, and Fortinbras realises that there is nothing he can do to win anymore as the Onimusha drives its sword into his third eye. As the sword's power courses into Fortinbras, his own power erupts in turn as he collapses, launching the Onimusha airborne at the same time. While the Onimusha is left unconscious as it reverts back to human, Fortinbras is left dead on the ground, and Samanosuke slowly wakes up to see a reflection in one of Fortinbras' eyes. He gets up to see Nobunaga watching over him, having finally reached the demon world, though like in game, whatever confrontation they ever have here is left rather ambiguous before they both escape. One thing that isn't in the game is one final scene with Guildenstern, as he warns Samanosuke that despite Fortinbras' death, the Genma army remains infinite, promising to return one day. This leaves us with the final epilogue of events following the defeat of the Genma, with Yoshitatsu Saito dying of illness in 1561, being succeeded by his son Tatsuoki, and Nobunaga beginning the siege of Inabayama in 1567 and exiling Tatsuoki, ending the Saito clan entirely, though whether or not the Genma aided him remains unknown. Yuki takes refuge with Sokyu Imai in Sakai following the fall of Inabayama, boarding a Nanban ship to journey abroad alongside Yumimaru. As for Kaede, we get the same now retconned epilogue of her never again finding Samanosuke and beginning her employment as an agent of Mitsuhide until her death in the 1582 Battle of Yamazaki. The chapter and the manga ends with one final shot of Samanosuke after he disappeared, though Yuki and Yumimaru remain certain that he will return should the Genma reappear in the future. And with that, we have completed our coverage of yet another Onimusha manga. Needless to say, the lore revelations that we get here are massive, and really clear up quite a few things that were otherwise rather uncertain. I still stand by the fact that the truth about the Bishaman's sword is my favourite lore drop, finally explaining not only why it's in the demon world, but also the identity of the corpse that it's found impaling. The fact that it's actually the corpse of the original God of Darkness is huge. Another favourite of mine is honestly the initial moments before the battle between Samanosuke and Hakuba, purely because of how much she trolls him about the panda costume, something else I'm honestly surprised was canonised. While I still think that narratively, Twilight of Desire is my favourite of the mangas, there's no doubt in my mind that this manga has by far the best art, though I suppose it helps that this is the only one that's actually in colour. Regardless, I'm thrilled to finally see this fully readable in English, and I think that may be the last manga left to translate, which means there's no more story to cover, at least not until Way of the Sword finally releases next year. Once again, I'd like to give a shout out to the people involved in getting this finished. It's no exaggeration to say that without TJ6 and Bonsai Man 007 finding usable scans, as well as those in the Onimusha Discord helping with the translations, this would have never been even remotely possible. So a very special thanks to them for helping me out along the way. And thank you all for watching as well. I hope that you enjoyed diving into this once lost piece of Onimusha media as much as I did. And of course, if you are a fan of Onimusha based content like this, be sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss any more. I would very much appreciate it. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Danish out.